and share screen. Mm-hmm. How do I share screen? So I need to have started that. Give me a new tab. Give me the movie. Pause the movie. Share the screen. Go to full screen. And I'm up in the corner. I think we've got it. And I am recording to the cloud. Okay, so this is the first lecture on film noir, and we're moving on from melodrama. So it's not a bad time to kind of revisit a genre. And now that we're moving on to a second genre, and we can see the differences in priorities and emphasis, it'll actually, I think, deepen our understanding of how genre functions, because film noir has a very different mechanism. So what melodrama and film noir share, as do all of the genres, the Western will do this as well, is they are attempting to construct a compensatory experience within the context of reality in modernity. The reality that melodrama deals with, in a way, is the same reality that film noir deals with, but there are different attitudes about what reality consists of. So there is not only a nostalgia for transcendental certitude in melodrama, there is a belief that it still exists somewhere behind the veil of modernity, behind money, behind appearances, behind being used by other people, like as Charlotte Vale and Lucy from Broken Blossoms. But there's this idea that you get closed off from it, and you can't find your way back to it. Think of Cheng Huan and that opening shot. But it can potentially break through the way the blossoms break through, and the way Lucy breaks through and falls onto the floor of Cheng Huan, or the plastic bag, which seems to break through. And we talked about breakdown moments and breakthrough moments. And the breakdown moments are moments where one can't find access to something beyond. And so there's a mixture of depression and anxiety and hopelessness, and then usually unexpectedly a breakthrough occurs. And one of the major mechanisms of breakthrough in melodrama is sacrifice. Sacrifice is the way that melodrama claims the transcendence and the sacred is still out there. The way that the camera will finally head up into the stars in the final scene of Now Voyager, after they've outlined their sacrifice in detail. Lester's been shot. That's a sacrifice he's happy to take. It wasn't like he was really alive anyway. And so it's for him, it's a very positive trade. And in Safe, of course, all of these things are challenged. Safe potentially you could try and make a case for Safe as a film noir, only in the sense that the melodrama in Safe fails. But the reason I wouldn't, strictly speaking, call it a film noir is that it tries so hard to be a melodrama. And in order for it to really feel like film noir, there has to be a fatalism, not a sense of a failure to, because there's still a failure to, a sense that she's failing to break through at the close of Safe. When she's looking into the mirror and saying, I love you, I love you. There seems small chance of a breakthrough occurring. She's now inside a white ceramic igloo. And even architecturally, it looks like something that's impenetrable. But she is still trying to evoke the melodramatic breakthrough. But there's no music, I don't believe, and that's telling in a way that there's no soaring violins or anything like that to help us with the moment, as there is in Now Voyager, certainly, and in American Beauty, it's a different sort of a techno beat, but it has a kind of something is coming through feel to the soundtrack. So melodrama does not believe that the sacred is still beyond the everyday. There is an existential, authentic insistence that there's nothing beyond, and that whatever satisfaction we get or don't get is going to be achieved in this world, and that sacrifices for suckers. And film noir is a curious, because in a way that it can't, when all the other genres, film noir is an exception in this sense, all the other genres posit possible reasons why the world has slipped from the sacred to the desacralized, and all of them in different ways posit, can there be a return, can there be a breakthrough? And we'll see this because we'll see that again in the Western, although it's really the real that has to break through in the Western, the landscape, the desert, the weather, the horses, the cows, the thingness of things is what returns in the Western. So in some ways, the Western takes us back to the first day of creation, the Garden of Eden, back to the moment of biting the apple or not, stripping it all the way back to the moment before corruption begins, and using the landscape very tellingly, and also setting the Western will keep setting the time frame to that, often to the period right after the Civil War, or perhaps even earlier than that, but always insisting it's somewhere in the 1860s, which is sort of pre-modern capitalism, certainly pre-modern globalism. And then much of what happens in the Western becomes an allegory of the takeover of capitalism and globalism, and the way that it mediates and buffers us from the lived realities all around us. But noir is the most philosophical, has the most philosophical feel of all the genres. It certainly leans on what Jean-Paul Sartre outlined in existentialism, which is the only authentic life is a realization that reality is based on nothingness. Sartre's famous title for his book, Being and Nothingness. Being is our experience in relation to nothingness. That's the authentic. And the inauthentic is that being is our relationship to anything we can get to bridge over nothingness. So using language, primarily, possibly images, but this is where movies are interesting, because the word is a presence that emerges from absence. So that I can say the dog, and there's no dog here, the dog is absent, but that's what gives the word, the dog, presence. Obviously, it'd be more present if a dog trotted into the room when you said the dog, because then it's clear that the dog, the word the dog is a somewhat arbitrary referent that is assigned to this this actual dog. The dog doesn't have to be there for the sign to signify, but it's clear that the sign is not a dog. And that's the problem with language, is it creates presence based on absence, but it's very good at acting like the presence is all there, has replaced the absence. It doesn't, language doesn't replace absence. It substitutes for it. It puts itself in front of it. It redirects our attention from it, but it's never anything other than a referent without any inherent meaning, imposing an apparent permanence on not only nothingness, but nothingness by definition is impermanent. I mean, the nothingness itself is permanent, which means that nothing in it can have permanence. So that's the other thing language helps us with, is very time-based, and it helps impose at least a sense of permanence. Nietzsche, famously says, if you stare long enough into the abyss, it will begin to stare back into you. Now, that's not a bad definition of film noir. These characters, Hal Roberts in Detour, for instance, they pride themselves, and certainly Vera, on their ability to stare into the abyss. I mean, Vera is savage in her insistence that things are what they are, and is simply uninterested in. I mean, there are moments where you can tell she does seem maybe sad that she doesn't really have any relationships, and seems for a flickering moment, the kind of pseudo marriage that she and Al Roberts form. I mean, she does sign in using his name as a married name, claiming that they have to make the car sales that they're about to do look more legit. But and then she goes back and forth between scorn and cynicism and wanting to make sure that he understands that she is manipulating him at every stage, and he's just a thing, and she'll throw him out as soon as she's extracted every drop out of him. Then there are other moments, inarticulate moments, where she shows a momentary possible availability to him, which he typically, he's very angry and very trapped, and then she goes back to her own cynical posture. So there is, I suppose it makes sense in a way that film noir typically does not feature marriage. It doesn't feature families. It doesn't feature a home. Look how transient Detour is. They're either in a car or a hotel or a used car lot. I think those are, or he's playing in a sort of second tier nightclub. These are all transient spaces. And they're on the road, so not just in. I mean, they're in it, and I think that the car on the road is so crucial to film noir. And again, interesting to note how cars and roads are not. Families are dominant in melodrama. Cars and roads are not. Cars and roads are dominant in film noir. Families are not. That's not a coincidence. We can talk about that and more in the open class, I hope. There's something about the road. And so the car offers an apparent security that you're barreling down this road, but you're in a car and you have your glove compartment and you can have a drink and you have someone hold the wheel for you. You can, but it's also, it's the classic existential delusion that there's anything permanent about the car. The car is moving at 60 miles an hour. And this is clear when, if I just run the opening credits for a moment. So we're not even driving. This is really important. We're not driving forward. This is out the rear view window, and that alone breaks us off from melodrama. There's no progress. There's no forward motion. There's even a guy there briefly that we see whose car is broken down, and this is all we have. This is all that beingness can be in existentialism. And that is, we only know what's happened. And any way that we temper our experience of what happened by a sense of what either is happening or will happening is immediately delusion. This is, of course, in some ways, this is a parody of, I'll stop it for a moment, of the Western. I mean, the Al goes west, which is what you're supposed to do. First of all, he's going west, looking out the rear view window. He doesn't have a car. He's hitching. Haskell has a car, but he's probably owes money on it. He seems to be one of those guys who is living in the pocket of a certain fragile debt system. He takes book on horses. He's got some scam to rip off people, including his father, with Bible sales. He's got 700 plus bucks in a car, but you get the feeling that all of it is sort of borrowed. If any of you have encountered, either by watching or hearing about the Squid Game, strange Netflix show that has just exploded. It's Korean. You either can watch it dubbed or subtitles, and unless you know Korean, it's I guess on track to be Netflix's most popular show ever, which is kind of stunning. I mean, there are plenty of qualities in the show that might earn it, but they're not typically the ones that make something phenomenally popular. Like, this is Game of Thrones popular, and it's not Game of Thrones. At least what preliminarily, I've seen a couple episodes. It's finally a show that indicates that the basis of reality in postmodernism is debt. That there's nothing else. Debt is what gives us our sense of being. And of course, we want to get rid of the debt, but we also can't, because we've predicated our existence on either being in debt or the hope of getting out of debt, or the imagined liberation of no longer being in debt. I got to be careful because I don't want to give spoilers for those of you who are toiling through this work. But what I particularly would draw your attention to is how debt is existence. I'm in debt, therefore I am. It used to be, I think, therefore I am. Then it was, I shop, therefore I am. Beckett famously said, I suffer, therefore I may be, which is a pure existential. We are that which faces the void and looks into it and tries to, and lives in the awareness that we are both not the void and incapable of incorporating the void. And so that frustration in the existential framework is what being is. Being, it's an ing, it's a gerund word, it's an active verb. We can say to be, or we can say being, but to be, being is an action. It's an action that has to be repeated. Even though we hope these repetitive actions will inhere some sort of permanence upon our sense of being, it can't, because of being, by definition, is process. It's the process of attempting to impose permanence on our impermanence. That's what being is. I told you this was a philosophical genre, so hopefully you need to push pause and go get a cup of coffee, wake up your brain cells, so you don't feel like you're disappearing during this lecture. I think I'll work up an extra credit. Or no, probably I'll do the prompt, but I'll also then maybe an extra credit going to a different film noir. But here is, let's see if I can, not sure whether you are still seeing me in the upper right-hand corner, perhaps not. So I'm looking at an ad of a couple looking out over a pool in a home, and it says, she wants a pool, he wants lakefront property, your mortgage, your life, make the most of both. Now that's shocking, right? Life and mortgage, same thing. Like, this is what I meant to do. Debt is being, and it's in the fusion of mortgage and being as it devotes itself to acquisition. I want a pool, I want a lakefront property, I want more. Carol from American Beauty. We know how Melodrama deals with that. It says, no, that's taking you away from the sacred and the transcendent. Uh, Film noir is much more existentially authentic when it says this is just, there's no way to make the void permanent. There's no way to make its absence present. Its absence is what defines your need to formulate presence, but that presence is always in opposition to an absence that threatens to dissolve it. Vera she's like the void incarnate. He keeps staring at her and he keeps trying to, oh, it's a girl, she needs a ride. Well, I'm a big shot, I got money, I got a car. She falls asleep and he's like, poor kid. She wakes up, where's the body? She's like, now she's hellish, not a quote unquote bitch or a woman, but the void incarnate. He thought he was driving, he keeps thinking he's driving out of the void and he's driving further into it. Not least of all because he doesn't look back. He doesn't take any responsibility for where he is in life. Everything is fate. You know, the way he leans on fate, which he doesn't really explain much. And the way he even taunts us, the viewer of the movie, it's going to get you too. You know, you can look at you in the audience. What a different address to the audience, the constant voiceover, the angry voiceover, he keeps saying to us in the audience, stop judging me, you're not any better than me. You think you're better than me because fate hasn't tripped you yet, but it will. And notice how that sounds a little like Lester's famous closing. You have no idea what I'm talking about, but don't worry, someday you will. But what Lester's promising is that someday you'll understand there's this beauty behind everything, and all the things that you thought were important don't matter. Now, Noir would probably agree, all the things you think are important don't matter, but not because there's something that matters behind them. All the things you have don't matter because nothing matters, not because these things that you insist matter are blocking you from seeing what does matter. There isn't anything that matters. And so film noir very restlessly searches to figure out how to inhabit that authentic stance. But Al keeps breaking away from it. This drunk gave me a $10 tip, so now I'm heading out to sue. All of a sudden, everything is great. He has, in a relentlessly gloomy movie, he actually has a voiceover moment where he says, the future was all ahead of me, and it couldn't be any brighter if I embroidered it with neon lights. Well, there is no ahead. There's no forward. This car is going backwards. The only thing you can do is look out your back window. And there's some great shots of him seeing his eyes in the rear view mirror. Film noir is life in a rear view mirror, but it's lived by people who keep trying to look out the front, but there's nothing there. The front is void. All there is what's in the rearview mirror, what's disappearing under your tires, reappears out the back of your car. That's all there is of reality. I don't want to go back to not sharing the screen because then I can maybe show you those ads during the open class. I think I'll do something where I encourage you to look at car ads. Now, in 1945, that's when DETOUR is. This is just very immediately at the close of World War II. Automobile sales were beginning to ramp up, and in fact, owning a car, and obviously that's a tricky thing. Al doesn't own a car, Haskell does. There's so much about cars. And then they're going to sell the car. They're going to get $1,850 for it. So owning a car is still a really big deal. And in probably of any purchase you could make, the one that embodied most the rebirth of the American dream after the nightmare of World War II is the car. I mean, yes, you can buy a washing machine or a dryer, which in some ways come in a close second. That's the domestic proof that America's come through the war and out the other side, and now there's the highway's wide open. Well, of course, for women, the highway goes right into the kitchen, and then their frontier is the washer and dryer. Whereas men, particularly in the Western, obviously, but they're looking for the open road, and that basic conflict is never resolved. it's curious to me that Lester buys the red car and makes a big deal out of it and says, I rock, but the car sits in his driveway. I don't think we ever see him driving it. Carol drives her car, but she just listens to self-promotion tapes and rants about not giving in and not being a victim. They're now Voyager. She's in the car when she concedes that she'll marry Elliot. That's a dead end. So cars aren't up to much in now Voyager. They dominate Noir, but they're still going in circles or dead ends. And there's even in the screenplays of Noir, there's constant references to sort of relationships as stalled cars or running out of road. It's a baseball metaphor that Sue brings up. We're in the bush leagues, we struck out. And it's curious that in that scene, Al Roberts is, I don't know what you're talking about, but then when she hears him practicing, it says he'll make Carnegie Hall. Yeah, he's like, yeah, as a janitor, I'll debut in the basement. And so there he seems to agree with her that they've struck out, but then he's very inconsistent, obviously, and the voiceover is extremely unreliable, because like any first-person voiceover, we're only getting his side of the story, and it can fool us a little bit because his side of the story often takes us into scenes that then get acted out. So he'll say something like, the next morning she was just as rotten as she was the night before, and then his voiceover stops, and then we see the scene, and that can make us forget that this isn't a neutral camera. In a lot of ways, well, this entire movie is shot from the subjective point of view of Al Roberts. There's literally nobody else. Nobody else has a point of view in Noir. That's the other way that it's so different than Melodrama. There's no interest in the relational. The transactional has completely replaced the relational. And not with that melodramatic sense of, yeah, but we could change that. We could go back to the importance of the relational. That you can't go back to it because it was never there. And all the emphasis on losers and suckers in film noir is predicated on that. It's not that we lost track of the relational and we allowed the transactional to replace it. There's never been anything but the transactional. And the only reason we didn't know that, and the only reason we don't know that now, is we keep trying to pretty it up by insisting that it's relational and that it corresponds to something greater than us, and that the way to activate that comforting feeling of having a context within transcendence is through sacrifice. And so that's just absent from film noir. Let me go forward a little bit. It's interesting that because of this camera shot, the origin where this car began is getting tinier and tinier and essentially becoming a vanishing point, because film noir is very much as well about losing our myth of origin. Like, we thought we knew who we were. Like, he seems to be a classically trained pianist. We don't get much of the backstory, but somewhere he learned to play. He's clearly better than the average second tier pianist. So there must have been a myth. Noir kind of tends to open with a character who won't talk about his myth of origin except very bitterly. As a pipe dream, as a fantasy, and visually, cinematically, this is a brilliant translation by Ulmer, Edgar G. Ulmer, who was Viennese. He left Germany in the early 30s, one of many to flee the rise of Nazism, and like so many immigrant German immigrant directors, Fritz Lang being another, and there's like six or seven, Billy Wilder perhaps the most famous, and he has his own great noir, Double Indemnity. That this changed Hollywood. I mean, another possible explanation for where did noir come from is it's German expressionism comes to Hollywood, and the bitterness of both wars, the World War I, the intervening 20 years of inflation and depression of all sorts in Germany, the rise of Hitler, the defeat of Hitler, this all comes to Hollywood. And I think it finds traction there because so many Americans were so surprised and disappointed when World War II didn't fix everything, especially on the home front. America became a world power, possibly the world power, going right into the Cold War with Russia, and the only two nations for a while, at least, that had the atomic bomb. But at a basic level, things didn't change that much. Soldiers came back to employment was still difficult, or you could get it, but it was the wages were low. Marriages were under a lot of pressure. Undiagnosed PTSD was rampant. So either fiancés had men come home who didn't seem like the men that they courted, or young wives greeted husbands that they didn't recognize. Husbands didn't recognize themselves. They didn't recognize their wives, and none of this was being articulated. So another way to think about this is that the everything that the symbolic, money, the house, the pool, was having trouble pushing back the real, the formlessness behind. Because what's behind appearances is not the reality that the appearances cover up. It's the void that the appearances pretend can have an inherent meaning imposed upon it. So then this haunting view of a man walking on a road, a car hurtling past. So we have cars and we have hitchhikers, a lot of hitchhikers in Noir. I mean, hitchhiking is virtually unheard of now for a good reason. It's incredibly vulnerable. Either way, a hitchhiker can be picked up. I mean, the closest thing to it is there's that brief, maybe it's gotten better, but that concern about Uber, for instance. So which almost seemed like hitchhiking. Like, who is this driver? What company do they work for? What do they have a motive apart from the fare? So either the driver or the passenger, they're both potentially vulnerable. The drivers can be held up, obviously, by the people they pick up. So the demeanor of Al, it's whenever a movie begins, we as an audience seek to locate ourselves in it, and there is no invitation to imagine ourselves as Al Roberts. We're closed off from the very outset. He's depressed. He's shuffling along. He's affectless. He's frighteningly passive. We don't even see him get in the car. I mean, 1 minute he's walking, the next minute he's sitting, the next minute he's out of the car again. But we're not seeing any kind of process. He's completely dependent on the cars and the drivers. I get off at the next block, mister. All right, I'll get out here. There happens to be a diner. Fine, I'll go inside. At this point, we don't know it yet, that he is heading back from California. He's heading back from the West, having inadvertently killed a second person, Vera. And he's essentially has no identity because as he mentions or will mention, the police had found the body of Haskell, who he dressed in his clothes, but they're now searching. They're searching for Haskell as the man they think murdered his wife. In other words, they found Haskell and they found a dead body, and they assume Haskell killed that dead body and presumably went on to kill what they assume is his wife, that they also found in this hotel room. It's hard to know where that investigation is bound to start to unfold somewhere, somehow. And Al seems to recognize that too. I don't know how long it'll take, but someday some cop car is going to, a ride I didn't thumb is going to pick me up. maybe, but that to some degree that was a nod toward the Hays Code, which Noir is the most rebellious when it comes to the Hays Code, which insisted that murder be punished, that sexuality outside of marriage not be depicted or allowed. You can see the elaborateness with which they go stalk each other in circles when they're in the hotel room. And there's notes from the Hays Code saying there must be no suggestion that they had sex, despite sharing this hotel room. So you get all this sexual tension and flirting. And then she's like, I'll have the first bath, I'll take the bedroom. And they keep going back and forth. You take the Murphy bed. But in a way, what's so brilliant about it is it becomes an allegory of an awkward marriage, like the awkwardness of how do you manage your sexuality when you're married? Like there's might be the excitement of courtship, the possible transgression, but then what especially in the 40s, when premarital sex was certainly a fact, but not a kind of unnoted fact. It was dangerous and transgressive, particularly for the woman to have sex outside marriage, because they were so unprotected financially and physically and in other ways. In terms of pregnancy, there was no super reliable birth control in the 40s. So there was often, many couples seemed to find this a little bit of a letdown, that from sneaking around doing in the backs of cars and back rooms, suddenly you finally have your own room, your own bed, and then it's sort of, so what's sexuality now? And then children come along, and that's something else. So when she pulls the bed out, she goes, do you know how to work this thing? Well, the double entendre is kind of obvious, and it's got this phallic bed. It's actually straight up and down. And he says, I invented it. And it sort of smacks it back into the wall. But there's also a great shot there where the bed divides them. There's the use of a Murphy bed. This is almost such a visual genius. He sees shapes. Reminds me of Bergman and maybe even Ancien Andalou with the shapes. The shapes and objects in this movie in some ways seem to have more resonance than the people. That giant coffee cup that we see in the first scene, it's like big as his head. The coffee cup seems more there than he is, and the jukebox, and then dissolving into the jukebox and going through the jukebox, the turning record into the first recollection of singing with Sue. I can't believe that you're in love with me, and that's its own theme. How do you believe that someone's in love with you in the noir sensibility? So that's.
Here we are. I turned down here at the next block.
Thanks, mister. I'll get off there.
So again, we skip him getting off. We skip him going into the diner. We skip him ordering a coffee. He's stationary again, and drinking his coffee. Also notice there's no shot counter shot. Nothing to suggest relationship. Thanks, mister. They haven't exchanged names. He looks straight ahead. He never looks at the guy. We only see half of the other guy's face, and then we go right into another a sort of failed relational moment where this truck driver tries to chat with him so we can have a buddy to drive and talk to and stay awake and presumably give him a lift. So that search for something mutually reciprocal on the part of the truck driver. And it's curious that Al, who complains all the time about how he can't get lifts, and who actually needs to not draw attention to himself, seems incapable of doing anything but dominating, making everybody in the diner. And who's going to forget he was there after he's created this stink? He claims he has to be incognito. And this guy, this trucker from nowhere, offers him a ride to nowhere, which is kind of what he needs, frankly. And he's so angry. He's like, no, forget it. I don't know. And they're finally like, I hate that song, and turn it off. And they're like, no, I'm not gonna. And why don't you just leave? I mean, he's putting up a gigantic sign that he was here, and increasing his chances of becoming visible again. Of course, that may be part of the point. He needs to be dead. He needs to be invisible. There's a moment earlier in the movie where after Haskell dies and he's in a hotel tossing and turning, he says this nightmare of being a dead person will be over, because he's being Haskell. Notice how many dead people there are in this noir, so to speak. Like Vera seems to become, and he says this, the ghost of Haskell. It's like she was lying there asleep looking just like Haskell. I didn't like that part. And then her eyes pop open and she's like, where did you leave the body? And she seems like almost possessed by Haskell. And by the way, did he kill Haskell? He says he didn't. And the visual evidence is definitely leans toward supporting his story. But remember, the visual evidence is his own memory loop. It frankly would make more sense if he had killed Haskell, because his sudden conversion when Haskell falls out, no one will believe me. The guy had heart pills in his glove compartment. He asked for them like several times. I mean, forensic science probably wasn't quite up to the Miami CSI stuff that we see now, but he fell out of the car and his head hit the pavement. How is that going to look like a murder? Vera says at one point, "Oh, you kissed him with a wrench." Yeah, okay, that would look like a murder. But I would think even a really, dense forensic would say this bump on the first of all, the bump on the forehead is commensurate with falling out and hitting his head, and the implication, frankly, is that Haskell's dead. And that's probably would also come out in a really basic forensic. The evidence of a heart attack, which seems to be what Al is saying. Haskell had a heart attack. He died. I opened the door. He fell on his head and he hit his head. And then I realized that everybody would say I murdered him. Really? I mean, that's where you have to hit pause, because frankly, Vera's story makes more sense. Because then after that, he's like, and then I realized I have to drive his car. Why? So I have to steal his car. No, okay, well, if I'm going to steal his car, I got to steal his clothes and his wallet and his money so that I don't raise suspicion when I'm driving the car. So if you replay this, it seems to make a lot more sense that he murdered Haskell and did all these things that he says he did and then insists that he didn't. And how are we to believe that he didn't kill Vera? It's so funny when he keeps sneering at us, saying, what do you think? You even think I killed them. So what, Vera particularly, where the evidence does seem somewhat more damning, but again, not as damning as he seems to assume. She's in the other room. He was pulling on the cord. So you got to ask yourself, is his insistence on being guilty just a particularly paranoid construct, or is he in fact guilty? In fact, this whole movie, and this is often the case with Noir, it seems like a fever dream because we begin where we end, literally. Like this is the shot we'll return to at the end of the movie. Have we gone anywhere? It's been this big circle, and how does Sue figure into all of this? Sue becomes this idealized woman, the opposite of Vera. And now he can't get to Sue. Maybe, is there a Sue? Did he kill Sue? Is Vera Sue? I mean, I know I'm making this kind of sound crazy, but that's what the expressionism of noir does. Identities are very slippery, and you'll need to think a lot about this by the time we get to Memento, and even before that, Lost Highway, the David Lynch movie, where we're literally going to see a character who becomes someone else inside a maximum security prison where he's awaiting execution for apparently the murder of his wife, and they go to get him and he's not that guy anymore, and it's literally impossible in any physical way for anyone to have gotten in or out. So then they run they try to figure out who this guy is. That he's just randomly found in their cell, and he's doesn't even know the wife, and they have to let him go. They've got nothing on him. So, and the direction and the redirection of constantly have to remind yourself that in noir, there's really only the subjective camera. There's no objective camera, and that's part of their insistence. There's no transcendence. There's no omniscient. There's no neutral point of view. Anything that looks like a neutral point of view has been constructed as a neutral point of view to aid in someone's subjective construction. So here comes the friendly waitress.
Want anything else?
No. Hey, you. Me? Yeah, you. Where you heading? East.
Yeah. I thought if you was heading north, I might be able to help you out. Pushing the Salt Lake, and I don't like to ride alone at night. I'm one of those guys that got to talk or I fall asleep.
So, you might think superficially like, oh, he didn't take the ride because he's heading east. Where is he heading? He can't go to Sioux. He can't go back to New York. He's supposed to be dead. So, and even if he does want to eventually get east, it doesn't matter how. So he could go north or south. So this refusal doesn't make sense.
Your partner, he's got Lou to keep him company, but I ain't got nobody at all. Where you coming from?
West.
Yeah, sure, I know that. Where, L.A.?
Maybe.
Got a cousin out in L.A. You don't say, eh?
And here's the break where Al Roberts remains, transactional, and it's this relational attempt grinds to a halt.
You're not much of a talker, are you?
My mother taught me never to speak to strangers.
Well, wise guy.
So what?
Okay, don't get sore. He's trying to be sociable. That's...
The way that Al Roberts is preparing to rise up out of his seat and get into a fight is unbelievably stupid. If they get into a scuffle and the local cops are called, he's done. There's a, if we think of this as a trauma narrative, because we have no evidence that Al Roberts is a soldier, and there's no real reference to World War II, which in a way is a stunning absence. I mean, PTSD was unacknowledged and undiagnosed with the return of the soldiers, but noir is a traumatized narrative. It has gaps. It has triggering points. He keeps getting triggered. Why? Well, that's the nature of triggers. You don't know why. It doesn't make sense. And Al acts like a guilty person who also wants to be caught. Guilt is certainly one of many feelings one can have coming back from a war as a soldier. The kind of actions that you witness or perhaps are pulled into committing don't jive with your domestic sense of yourself. I mean, PTSD essentially is going through experiences that shatter your ability to have a coherent self, because it reveals the degree to which yourself, as you understood it up to the point where you went to war, was a total fabrication, because you don't recognize yourself. And this is all over DETOUR. Soldiers went to the war and came back someone else. Al Roberts sets out and he becomes Haskell, and then he becomes a dead man, and then now he's literally nobody. And it's almost like he's willing to, despite what he says, to fight his way back into a sense of existence. And this will come up again when he tries to almost starts a fight about the jukebox.
Hey, Glamorous. Change for a dime, will you?
Let's have something quieter this time, Joe. My head's splitting.
Is that what's wrong with it?
Done with your coffee?
No. And don't rush me.
Notice that second request on her part is less friendly and more guarded, because she got rebuffed the first time, and now she's seen him rebuff this other guy, and then he has to add and don't rush me, which also, doesn't make any sense. I know you guys want me to leave. I'm not gonna leave. I'm here. He's acting in the opposite of his existential dilemma, which is he's dead. He needs to be an absence, a permanent absence. Sue's, if he does what he says, Sue will never know what happened to him. The last thing she heard him say on the phone was, don't even try and talk me out of it. Just expect me. Well, it's going to be like waiting for Godot. He's never going to arrive. Now here's a great use of close-up to come up with what's the visual equivalent of being triggered. And constriction is one of the hallmarks of a triggering episode in PTSD. The world just closes down, and so in a very different, Griffith used the close-up to show some kind of connection that was growing between Lucy and the transcendent, and the use of the close-ups and who's the shared close-ups with Cheng Huan. Here, it's the same editing technique. This is where genre is interesting. A close-up in Noir is never a moment of dawning awareness of the transcendent, and the way it is throughout the close of now Voyager. It's a moment of panic, of existential panic, of constriction, of you're trying to hang on to this paranoid, fragile self-construct, and you're discovering over and over again that the self is a sign without a referent. Like there is nothing that confirms yourself as something connected to anything that exists. So in a way, all of us wouldn't necessarily have quote unquote PTSD, but to have a self at all is to be subject to a degree of trauma. There's the extent to which the ego is paranoid. The ego is has an element of trauma construct to it, to the degree that it's fiction, and therefore vulnerable to paralyzing contradictions. The end of Joyce's Araby is that famous example of I saw myself as a creature in the dark. If you've had A10, it's the ego is a paranoid construct that views the other with both hope and suspicion in equal measures. Like, will you fulfill me? Will you tear me apart? Those are the two sort of toggle switches of how the self approaches others. Doesn't see others as selves as well, but as potentially things that will confirm their referent. So yourself, the referent of yourself is your own imagined ideal ego, and then everything you do to a certain extent is judged in relation to how it confirms or contradicts your ideal image, and all of that is set up as a way to have an apparatus in front of the void. So the breakdown moment in Melodrama is similar to the breakdown moment in Noir, but what makes the two genres different is that the breakdown is a failed breakthrough that is potentially possible. And in Noir, the breakdown is inevitable. All there can ever be is either a kind of imposed stability or a breakdown. You can see that actually that jerk as though someone has tossed sand in his face.
Hey, turn that off. Will you turn that thing off?
What's eating you now?
Yeah, what's eating you? That music, it stinks. Oh, you don't like it, huh? No, turn it off.
Oh, wait a minute, pal. That was mine, you see. This is a free country. I play whatever I wanted.
Okay. Sure. If you don't like it, you don't have to listen to it. And you can leave here anytime.
That okay is strange. He's been so belligerent and so aggressive. But this is a great depiction of the difference between reality and the real. This song is got a connection to the real. It's got a connection to that part of that thing that threatens Al's construction. Because right to the end, he never really challenges his sense of Sue. he idealizes Sue because, again, we don't know who Sue is. We don't know who Vera is. Is Vera as big a bitch as she seems? Is Sue as perfect as she seems? No. In fact, I get the feeling I get is that they're the same woman in a way. If a woman is making Al feel wanted and powerful, then there's Sue. If a woman is making him feel, inadequate and guilty, then she's Vera. So it could be the same woman, so to speak. Because the other thing that melodrama and noir have in common to a certain degree is they trade in psychological allegory, but the psychological allegory is toward wholeness and fulfillment in melodrama, and it's toward breakdown, nervous breakdown in noir.
Okay, I'm sorry I asked. First good piece played tonight and you don't like it. Some people just ain't got any good taste.
By the way, he didn't ask. I'm sorry I asked. He said, turn it off. It stinks. Where's the request? He's sorry that he brought attention to himself. Another brilliant visual equivalent of constriction. They use it, the close-up as claustrophobic, followed by this strip of light. Then this Ulmer, the director, made DETOUR for PRC, Publishing Release Corporation or something, but it was often called Poverty Row. The budgets were super cheap. The accounts vary to a certain degree, but it would appear that DETOUR is made in 6 days, which is unbelievably fast, for possibly $60,000, no more than $100,000 total, which is also absolutely minuscule. So Ulmer would have been under intense pressure to complete the shoots. Notice there aren't a lot of setups. It's a cheap film in every sense of the word, and that's also its genius. That the way that Ulmer works within these imposed constraints. Most people do think DETOUR is probably the best noir ever filmed, and there's no question it's by far the cheapest. And the people in it, Al Roberts, or sorry, the actor, this actor right here, was trying to get back into a picture. So the remarkable autobiographical thing about some of the noirs, especially this one, is that everybody in this movie is feeling disenfranchised in their own lives. They're either trying to make it. Anne Savage, who plays Vera, could become a star, but meanwhile she was doing these cheapy pictures. You mean that sweater she wore? If you look closely, this is a story that she tells herself after he sees her and she walks toward the car. The sweater's pretty tight and it shows off her figure. And it's just a second there where she's getting in the car. If you look closely, you'll see that the sweater is bunched up in the back. And what happened is Ulmer just saw her. The sweater needs to be tighter. I mean, this is the tracking shot where, despite Al's protest, he's on his way to meet his fiancée. What is he doing? Picking up. He just says there was a woman. What kind of an explanation is that? Imagine if Sue were there, or is he going to call Sue and say, by the way, I picked up a sexy woman at the gas station because there was a woman. I think Sue's going to have a legitimate complaint. But it's a great moment where you can see that, Ulmer didn't call wardrobe. He didn't have makeup arrive. He didn't get another sweater. He grabbed a pin and pulled her sweater from the back and pinned it in the back so it was tight in the front, and then pretty much tried to keep it out of the shot, but didn't even, I guess he may have rechecked and said, well, it's too late. He literally didn't have much film. One of the reasons that Anne Savage talks so fast, according to her, is that he didn't want to waste film. But he also, it is in character, but her delivery of her lines is like a machine gun. Shut up, you're stupid. You're not only stupid, it's just like, pew, 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 and it just rapid fire. Whereas his voiceover meanders a bit. unlike her. But it's typical of him that we only get the Vera he experiences, and he experiences Vera as a machine gun in a way. And I don't think the World War II illusion is far-fetched. This sudden opening fire, which seems to be a good description of Vera's delivery.
Is there always that rotten tune following me around, beating in my head, never letting up? Did you ever want to forget anything? Did you ever want to cut away a piece of your memory or blot it out? You can't, you know.
Again, I can't help pausing on trauma here. That is the problem, I mean, right? But he's now relating. Every soldier from World War II who suffered would say this: I want to forget things that happened in the war. And he's bringing that up. Has there ever been a part of your memory you want to cut out? Because it's triggering you, and you're like, you can't, and then what follows here is a perfect description of the triggering effect in trauma.
No matter how hard you try, you can change the scenery, but sooner or later you'll get a whiff of perfume, or somebody will say a certain phrase or maybe hum something. Then you're licked again.
What a great unmotivated shot. Like, why did Ulmer just go right and then pan down to have this giant coffee cup looming in the foreground? It's another beautiful impressionistic, expressionistic. This looks like looming anxiety. That feeling you may have had when you get super anxious. You tend to, like, your eyes sort of dart around and you notice pointless details about everything. Your watch or your shoes, or some lady's tapping a pen, and you're trying to walk out of an anxious feeling, and the objects around you seem menacing, because the ego is a paranoid construct, and when the ego is in danger of crumbling, or when its perceived connection to its own ideal is threatened, you get paranoid, and objects suddenly seem out to get you. And even sitting in a theater, this is a gigantic coffee cup, which, if it really were as big as it looks and it were to tip over, it would crush you. Now, nobody's actually going to go through that particular logic, but visually, that's what you get. And also, and given that his subjectivity is being challenged, that's the objects become more present as your subjectivity threatens to blink out. As you threaten to be an absence in your own presence, then the objects all around you threaten to take up that space that previously was your presence.
I can't believe that you're in love with me. I used to love that song once. So did the customers back in the old Break of Dawn Club in New York. I can't remember a night when I didn't get at least 3 requests for it. Sue, she was always selling it too. Those were the days.
So there's a great move from the circular record to the circular drum, to serve as a transition into what now will be his acted out memories. But remember, and Ulmer makes it very clear, this poses as a neutral shot, as an objective shot, but it's also kind of presented as a dream sequence, and we'll feel that at some other points too. So the demeanor here, this is his ideal image, that he's a great pianist, a beautiful woman's in love with him, she's a great singer, they're going places. This is him in his ideal moment, which he's sort of permanently severed from now, as we discover. So just to make a broader point here, but right now he's well within his necessary fiction in this shot, and with his pleased looking face. And when language and logic are adhering, then what's beyond language and logic, which is the empty essence of reality. The essence of reality is emptiness, which is not essence. Well, it is. But what happens, that's the whole point of existentialism, is that essence is emptiness. Form is formless. When a vase holds a glass of water, the vase is simply a way of shaping emptiness. There is no vase as vase. The vase is only a vase because of everything around it that's not, and everything around it is what it is. But the vase, like the ego, like the construction of the self, is a construction that imposes itself on impermanence and absence and attempts to stabilize it. But it's less real than all of the things around it, as kind of the same idea with the coffee cup. So let me jump ahead a little bit. I think this
That has nothing to do with it.
I'll make out all right. But I'm going to California.
Any secrets from each other, Sue? Next week we're going to make with the ring and the license. You and
So this is their breakup, and arguably, and this, you'll see this in Lost Highway too, because I'm going to argue that Lost Highway is practically a remake of Detour, except that David Lynch only dwells in the surreal, and he insists on putting you as an audience member in the reality of the surreal, whereas this movie still allows the audience to presume that there's a reality that everyone is. This literal reality that it's possible to shore up, although there's a lot in this, and Lynch is a favorite film of Lynch's, and a lot of other people notice this too. This Wizard of Oz quality that is Kansas more real than Oz? Not really. And any reality Kansas has is dependent upon insisting on the absolute unreality of Oz, and that seems to be the lesson that Dorothy has to learn with her red shoes, and that there's no place like home. Well, that's right. There is no place like home. Home is not a place. I mean, home is a place in space. And she ran away from it when the teacher came to get the dog, and she ran away to Oz. And after Oz terrifies her for a while with its formlessness, and the way that everything seems to have access to her, she seems to be happy to go back to Kansas, although nothing seems to have changed. I mean, what happened to the teacher, by the way? Is she coming back for Toto? We saw the Wicked Witch that is her equivalent got melted, but that was in Oz. Nothing that I can tell has changed. Toto's just as vulnerable to the law as before Dorothy ran away with him. So, this is an interesting clip to replay and notice that, and he's furious with her, and he won't let himself, he becomes a sulky child. But is this, just playing with the psychological allegory, is this the scene where he killed her? And then is everything that follows his elaborate scenario about how there was other people who got killed and did the killing?
be a team.
Yes, that's right. In the Bush League.
I don't get.
So he says the same thing about Carnegie Hall, but when she says it, he's being naive here. Like, let's get married, let's make with the ring, and we're a team. And she's breaking up with him. I think the only reason it doesn't seem more obvious is that he's filtering the memory through so much repression. He can't even deal with the fact that she, is this really all that she said? Because you could replay this scene and she could say things like, yeah, you're an okay guy, Al, but we're through. You're not going anywhere, and I think I have better options. There's a veneer here, but she's very clear. You can't seem to avoid the fact that she didn't begin by saying, let's let's go to California. She doesn't invite him. Later, she doesn't. She seems to assume he won't go, and it's only at the very end that in a phrase that almost seemed tagged down by Al, she says, "Maybe you'll decide to come out later." There's nothing about the way she's presented up until that line that suggests she wants him to come out later, and that lends that gives an added gravitas to his line, saying, "Don't try and talk me out of it. Just expect me." If you replay that from the point of view of maybe she wants to talk him out of it. And he's being, I can't say he's being abusive in that moment, but he is got this dominating, especially when it comes to women. He wants to dominate them and is frightened and truculent when they push back. But really, both women seem to get his number more than he himself would like to admit.
We've been struck out.
It's a funny way to talk, darling. Don't you want to marry me?
Al, look, I love you. You know I do, and I want to marry you.
But
not now. Only after we've made good. Sunday, I'm going away. Oh, I know you'll think it's silly. That's why I hesitated to tell you. But I'm going to California. I want to try my luck in Hollywood.
it's the most stupid thing I ever heard of.
So there's a supportive husband. That's the most stupid thing I ever heard of.
Don't you know millions of people go out there every year and wind up polishing cuspidors? I thought you had better sense.
You sound as if you don't think I have any talent.
That has nothing to do with it.
I'll make out all right.
Maybe. But what about...
So that to me, that's where Sue is not the little angel. I'll make out all right. It's the subtext of that comment is I couldn't do any worse. And in fact, I am doing worse because you're a wet blanket and you're dragging me down. And I think I can actually have a career. But this is also, many of the film noirs were written by writers who were struggling to make a living in Hollywood. In fact, Martin Goldsmith, who wrote the novel Detour, that this movie is based upon, was a desperate writer. I mean, he wrote the novel, and then they hired him to write the screenplay, and then nobody liked the screenplay, and they bought the options on the book, so they just threw him out. And Ulmer wrote the screenplay, and probably was better. And I don't think we have a copy of what Goldsmith wrote, but apparently it was way super elaborate. It would cost way too many sets. It was completely impractical. So Ulmer just tossed it, but it still follows the book pretty closely. Ulmer didn't just throw out the book, but he really broke it down and just seemed to have like Hitchcock could do this too. He would just root out the psychological implications of the story. And whereas the actual writers, the noir writers, would sometimes, they thought the audience might wanted to have the excitement, the guns and this and that. And those are forgettable noirs, if they're noirs at all, because they don't have enough. The noir, the power of the film noir is not the crime. In fact, think how different this is than Sherlock Holmes stories, which operate more like puzzles. And we're still interested in that. We have TV series that are based on Holmes, but there's not much interiority. The emphasis there is on the elaboration of the crime, the master criminals, or the shrewdness of Sherlock Holmes in discerning clues where everyone else just sees random stuff lying around. But Holmes is also like, as a kind of, he's a psychoanalyst. He's like Freud. Someone walks in his office and he can tell by the shape of their hat what their job is. The fact their shoes aren't polished means their wife is starting to neglect them. He's got this entire profile by just glancing at someone, but it's all surface. And usually almost all the crimes in Holmes are motivated by seeking monetary gain. It's virtually no crimes of passion. That's because a crime of passion is much easier to solve. And when you kill someone in a rage, you're much more likely to set up a scene where they can be traced back to you. So Holmes's villains are bloodless. They spend months sometimes elaborating a scheme, like a woman who says she was hired to stand in front of a window for an hour every day for like 2 months. And this, we find out much later in the story that was so that neighbors and others would assume that was their daughter, whom in fact they had already locked up in an institution. And so then they tell her to go away, and then they claim the daughter ran away, and so on. Anyway, lost my train of thought a little bit, but that is, but detective stories are an original genre that emerged in modernity, beginning with Holmes, possibly with Edgar Allan Poe, the Purloined Letter. And that makes sense, you know, because with the rise of the urban context and the difficulty of keeping track of anybody, the detective became more important than the police or the soldier. It was a sort of a new authority figure who lived in limbo. They film, and that's where, even Holmes kind of lives in limbo, but he's, you know, he's just nothing if not logical. And increasingly, then the noir detective becomes this figure who kind of lives in the shadows, has a storefront somewhere, skulks around, and can see things the police don't. That's something Poe established with the Purloined Letter, is they have to go to Dupin because they can't find this ladder. They've repeatedly searched this apartment, and that's because it's pinned onto the bulletin board in plain sight. And so Dupin, the police, their mistake is they assume obviously a letter that's important must be hidden, so they don't see it when it's right in front of them. Okay, let's finish this part.
Doesn't it mean anything to you that you're busting up all our plans? We may not see each other for years.
It won't be that long.
I thought you loved me.
I do. You know I do. Well, here we are. Al, why can't you see my side of it? I'm young. We both are. And we've got all the time in the world to settle down. Really, darling, what I'm doing is the only sane thing to do. I hate the thought of being so far away from you, but we'll be together again someday. Maybe you'll decide to come out too later on.
So long.
Al, aren't you going to kiss me goodnight?
Sure, why not? Good night.
So that walking away from her like that, and is really almost looks like dissociation. He just acts like they've never met. And now in this scene, he'll get the $10 tip, and that will activate him to say, I'm coming out there. So, which brings us to another theme of noir, and that is the degree to which it's about a crisis in masculinity. I mean, I'm not saying that Sue was trying to tear down his masculinity. I don't think she was exactly, but she was feeling burdened by his lack of success, which he could only feel as a rejection of his. And so it does make sense in a different way that why is this $10 so important? It does temporarily allow him to play the master signifier again, like, hi Sue, it's me, and I got, well, he's kind of like, he has $10, but me right after that phone call, he's like, well, I was gonna have to hitch because I didn't even have enough for food after I hawked all my stuff. So he's back. And this was a problem to the degree that the man was supposed to be the provider. It wasn't easy, even in post-war America. The employment was relatively, it's funny, we seem to be in an almost current phase right now where shortly after World War II, employment was relatively plentiful, but it was also low pay. It's the same thing we're hearing about COVID. There are more jobs available than there are people unemployed in the US right now, at least. I didn't see the Canadian statistic, which means that it's not the case that you can't get a job. It's that two things seem to have happened. One is people want more from their jobs, and a kind of unexpected effect of COVID is people got thrown out of jobs. And I know one or two people who have said this to me. They didn't love the job, but they didn't want to walk away from the paycheck. And then they were let go. And then they were like, wow, okay, so I didn't want to jump, but I got pushed. Do I really want to climb back up? And they're taking their time. And I haven't seen, actual hard economic stats on this, but it has improved. It seems to be improving certain jobs. Bus drivers come to mind. They've doubled the salary in certain states for bus drivers because they can't get any. No one wants to be the bus driver. I think the other thing that people realize, I've mentioned this in other classes, I think, is that what generates wealth is work. And we've bought into this myth that money makes money, which is technically true. Jeff Bezos and all these people, their money makes money, but that's not wealth. In fact, that is a further extraction of wealth. The only thing that makes money, actually generates money, is work. And most of the people, anybody whose wealth is a result of their money making money, did not have to work the front lines during COVID. And the absurdity that minimum wage jobs were these were the people taking the most risk, especially in those early dangerous days, pre-vaccination, that you had to go to your $9 an hour job at McDonald's and greet people all day long. The service industry. So there's an increased self-awareness among workers on the front line. I think frontline workers that they've been duped a little bit into being made to feel like they aren't the main thing, that the main thing is the executives making tons of money because that's what makes jobs. And that's just not true. And in that sense, I'm looking forward to possibly, because unions have been in retreat since Reagan. And so bargaining power of workers has been terrible. It's been going downhill for a long time. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, COVID reset the table, and workers have a potential. They've figured out how they can get along with less. And so they're not willing to go back to the same crappy jobs for no pay. And now the money makers are getting nervous because they're the infrastructure of their wealth is workers who actually show up to work. Okay, so that's that. I'm not sure how long I've been going on here, so I would probably kind of draw it to a close because we still have the open class to get back to. Let me just go to him justifying what happened with Haskell.
Mr. Haskell, what's the matter? Are you hurt? Are you hurt, Mr. Haskell? Start your sermon. I'll listen to it.
This is where he attacks the audience. Start your tune, I'll listen to it. And, even now when I look at this scene again, it's not even clear he hit his head on the pavement. I mean, it seems so clear to me that he was dead in the seat and he just fell out of the car. It's a man dead of a heart attack. So everything that follows here is him launching. And the part that doesn't get mentioned, and then it shows up again when he sees Vera, is, he wants to be a guy with a car and a nice suit, and he wants the kind of guy who can impress girls and women and offer them a ride. And because that's the only thing that makes sense, because there was a woman. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily have to be a rocket scientist to remember that Haskell got scratched by a woman who was hitchhiking. Here's a woman who's hitchhiking. And he's got no reason to give her a ride, and lots of reasons not to, not least of all, courtesy to Sue, I suppose. But here's his explanation.
What you're going to hand me even before you open your mouths. You're going to tell me you don't believe my story of how Haskell died and give me that don't make me laugh expression on your smug faces. I saw it once he was dead, and I was in for it. Who would believe he fell out of the car? Why, if Haskell came to...
Maybe everybody? No, that's the only explanation that actually makes sense. So you could read this as this is the story he came up with after, either after murdering Haskell, literally, but it's got that trauma sense of like he forgot he killed him. And then he has to come up with all these bizarre ideas of how he couldn't have killed him because he doesn't remember it.
Of course he couldn't. Even he would swear I conked him over the head for his dough. Yes, I was in for it. Instinct told me to run. But then I realized...
Again, there's no evidence he's been conked over the head. And that fall out of the car doesn't seem to duplicate in any way the damage done by a conk to the head.
Hopeless. There were lots of people back down the road who could identify.
I got to add a conk to the head that kills you. I mean, we're talking about a fractured skull, at least. There's no way this is a fractured skull, whatever happened when he fell out of the car. That fall was not enough to even injure him very much less kill him. He's dead of a heart attack.
That gas station guy and the waitress. I would be in a worse spot then, trying to explain why I beat it. The next possibility was to sit tight and tell the truth when the cops came. But that would be...
Anyway, he works through this. Notices the music's become a little bit jaunty again. This is a great shot. Amazing use of depth of field. And notice the road leads to her. And then beyond the road is America. The West is the Western, the frontier. And she's standing there in this gateway position with her hands on her hips and her little suitcase. And visually speaking, it's almost like she just appeared, like she just came, that she is a hologram. She is his fantasy of Sue, and this time he's going to, make the relationship work, and he's stuck in a nightmare loop of the Sue that we saw back at the club, just tearing him down. Well, only this time doing it over viciously. Although if you look closely at Sue, she's really not pulling her punches either. I'm leaving on Sunday. I'm going to California. I'll get by. If those are the three sentences Al doesn't seem to be able to keep out of the recollection, but he tries to muffle them. But in everything else, about saying it's an ordinary romance. It was she loved me and I loved her, and she keeps saying, I love you, I do, but it's not very persuasive.
Hey, you! Come on if you want to ride.
So a note on her hairstyle, as Anne Savage, the actress, said that she showed up on set with the new, her hair freshly washed. And she was meeting the director, and I don't think she even expected them to do any scenes. This was the first scene she did. And they started like 5 minutes after Ulmer met her, and he looked at her hair and stuck his hands in some grease and just ran it through her hair like 4 or 5 times, and said, and she said she was like stunned, but he wanted her to look, as what Al says later, like she'd just been thrown off the crummiest freight train in the world. And it still has that look, if you can tell, of a probably a more elaborate hairdo that just got destroyed by Ulmer running his greasy hands through it. And he also wiped off her eye makeup, which I think you can tell, and her eyes look a little raccoony. This long tracking shot is unmotivated. It's like she's trying to walk into his reality. Okay, there it is. Just I froze on it. Here is where Ulmer took the back of her sweater and just yanked it. And see how long that shot lasts. Yeah, it's really fast. So he probably didn't see it when they were actually doing it, and then probably did see it later and then made the judgment that not going to reshoot. That was a long tracking shot, and it's there for 2 seconds. And in fact, never occurred to anybody until it became a famous story only after decades later, when Anne Savage, who lived into her 90s, certainly well into her 80s, and wound up going to film circuits at various times and telling the story of this movie, because this movie was, released as the second half of a double bill, and it's only 68 minutes, which was, most features were at least 90. But a lot of the noirs, these cheapy noirs, are at 65, 75. So they're very compressed in that sense. Okay, so I kind of need to wind this down, although it's hard. It's so delicious that I could do a kind of running soundtrack. And the stills are amazing. You can almost stop this detour at random and appreciate the mise en scène. There's a desert just rolling by. She's asleep, and here's where he starts musing again.
Instead of disliking her, I began to feel sorry for her. Poor kid probably had a rough time of it. Who was she anyway? Why was she going to Los Angeles?
This is where she looks
Where'd
like
she come
Haskell.
from in the first place? The only thing I knew about it was her name. Not that it made any difference. A few hours more and we'd be in Hollywood. I'd forget where I parked the car and look up Sue. This nightmare of being a dead man would be over.
I love this because her eyes are open and he hasn't looked over to her yet. So this is a scene where we're let in on it. But notice how this duplicates what happened outside the club, which makes it eerie that Vera's just another woman. He's kind of put her in the Sue position. I felt sorry for her. She probably had a hard time, and where's she from? And meanwhile, then her eyes pop open when her sleeping body's in the exact same position as Haskell. So she's channeling both Sue and Haskell, and it gives the eerie feeling, which will come out in Lost Highway, Lynch's movie, in spades, that everybody's just a figment of his imagination. I mean, he's met real people, no doubt, but he keeps transforming them into something that is intended to cater to his ideal image. And they do it briefly at best, although if you look closely, they don't seem to be doing it at all.
Well, it was no business of mine.
Where did you leave his body?
So that's probably my favorite moment. At the tail end of his silly romance, I suppose. And there is another great scene. I don't have time to find it right now because I don't want to keep you too long. But he says, if this were a melodrama or a romance, we'd probably, she'd die and we'd say some stuff of me and Sue would mumble something over her grave. It actually just literally critiques and tears down all these feel-good Hollywood genres, and it's the essence of noir, which is the essence of noir is a hatred of genre, and that's what its genre is, an insistence that behind all the other genres construct an elsewhere that imbues the present with significance, and noir is the one genre that insists that there's no elsewhere. And any significance that is imbued or appears to be is an imposition and an appearance, and a shamara that will vanish in the sun. Okay, I think I got to stop. Sorry, I'm having fun, but I don't want this tape to run on and on, so I will stop the share. Hello, I don't know whether you saw me up in the corner or not while I was taping, but I'm going to stop the recording. Okay.